Alastair Richardson of AMD. I am so pleased to welcome you to the showbiz show that is David Anderson talking market data. So I hope we're going to have a good chat about market data. I was thinking, how long have we known each other? Probably Austin, Texas, in a couple of times, a year or so, 2 years, but 3, 4 years
Around
now.
that, yeah, 3, 4 years. It's been a whirlwind, and nice to see you develop into this new role as well, doing these podcasts, which I think
Well,
are great for the
it's a
industry.
bit of fun. You probably noticed I do like the sound of my own voice, so this is a good opportunity to do that. So look, Alastair, let's sort of dive into the chat. But again, beforehand, what I do with everybody, I'm going to put your LinkedIn profile into the descriptions so everybody will know sort of where you came from. But it's still worth giving a little bit of an intro as to sort of who you are and where you came from. Because, I mean, you've got a pretty decent pedigree background in the sort of capital markets before you jumped into this wonderful world of hardware, which we'll talk about in due course. But how did you end up here, Alastair?
Sure, I'll give you a brief history of time. So, I mean, I started out off my career really at in the banking industry, working at places like Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, and Barclays Capital, including getting my European trading licenses and trading in an agency and Delta One capacity. So, very interesting time of the world, really. This was pre-crash, and through the crash back in 2008, and that era. But what I saw was really the growth of algorithms from their infancy. A lot of them in my first days were still being done in Excel, and ended up moving into a far cry from where we are today, really, with high performance platforms and then FPGAs and all kinds of different technologies. So I really saw an opportunity that more and more was moving towards a technologist role. And I went and did a number of startups, helping that progress towards electronification of our
Yeah.
market. And that's just continued more and more, and expanded into outside of equities and futures, which were kind of early adopters, into more and more markets.
So
That we
you consciously left the sort of actual participation in the capital markets to go into the technology space because you saw the opportunity.
I wouldn't say I left it. I've always been part of it.
Well,
I've
yeah,
always been back
you
speaking
segued.
to them and working with the industry to develop new solutions. But yes, I made a choice to go into the technology side and leverage a lot of that experience and knowledge from the actual trading and capital market side, and see how we can um, improve the technology from a fundamental perspective to give people the best options and democratization of technology.
Well, look, I sent you my three little ideas of how we'll take the conversation wherever it goes. But just so the audience can know what I'm going to bring up, first of all, I'm going to kick off by asking you, what are you seeing in the market data industry? You've been with us as Ed, excuse me, for the last 4 years or so. Again, you've been watching a lot of the. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. You've been watching at the FISD events that we've been involved in, general discussions about market data. So I want your sort of thoughts on that, your observations. Second part, which we just alluded to, what part does technology play in all this? Is it just about speed, or is there a bit more to it there? And then the third and final part is specifically hardware, which is a sub element of technology overall, and frankly, a newer topic out there. And I'd love you to help educate me, but educate the audience as sort of where that all fits in. So let's start with that first one. I mean, you've been part of the market data industry. You've been watching us all, at various events and what have you. What do you see? What do you think? What's the observation? I won't call you an outsider, but you're a slightly newer flavor coming to our world, which occasionally we do get stuck in our ways. I mean, again, what are you seeing?
Sure. So, I mean, I think, if I look over the last sort of 20 years, I mean, we've always needed market data in every different part of trading from forever, right?
Yeah.
Market data is a kind of cornerstone. So, you know, first thing, as I mentioned earlier, we do obviously see electronification of market data
Yeah.
and the ability to use that in different ways. And I think we went through a wave where you had the large firms doing their general market data platforms from a technology and upgrading with Electron and BPipe and others
Yeah.
at the higher end. But we also saw a lot of innovation in the industry. And I would say probably 10, 15 years ago, where we had companies, like Exergy, like Enix, like Novasparks,
All
um,
one now.
all one now. And
Yeah.
that's actually one of the points I was going to say. There's been a lot of consolidation,
Yeah.
but you had a lot of these entrants back in the day, and even Vela and Wombath and all of these names that used to be, and then there's
Yeah.
a ton of consolidation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, consolidations can be a good thing for the industry. And, there's some great bits of technology across all of these different firms that had their innovation and their days, and it's really exciting to see that. But what's also exciting is that there's a whole range of new startups coming out as well,
Okay.
um, which or relatively younger players in the market who are now taking a slightly different approach. And I think, you know, as I mentioned, there was the larger data providers in the past who have their entrenched systems and
Yeah.
which are very well known. You had these FPGA and these ultra low latency
Yeah.
participants, and now you're finding these new players who I think are taking advantage of hardware, and we can go into that later on
Yeah.
in the conversation. But looking at more commoditized hardware and how to really bridge that gap between the classic players, I would say, and the ultra low latency players and democratize that a bit more.
Well, and before we, and I do want to go into detail on those, but again, a general observation I've had because I've watched this over my 41 years in this industry, and I remember the whole low latency debate. God, that must be 20 plus years ago. We've been talking about sort of low latency. But one observation I would make is that was only a small rarefied part of the market. We loved talking about it because it was quite cool to talk about it, and I think some of the things you and I are going to talk about are quite cool. But I would sort of put it to you, they're only used by a very small part of the market. A lot of the market is rather boring and rather doesn't particularly seek ultra low latency, high frequency, or whatever. So, how do you see the market segmented? I mean, are you only targeting that rarefied upper echelon of the market? What about the whole swathe of the rather high latency or medium latency, or the people who don't really care about speed or frequency? I mean, where, how do you see the market segmented?
Sure. So, I mean, I think first of all, you're selling yourself a bit short. Market data is exciting no matter where you are. But
Exactly. It's even sexy, we've tried to say, maybe that's pushing it a
um,
bit far.
but yeah, but no, I 100% agree. So I mean, there's a lot of different latency profiles depending on what you're looking to do. And you're right. There's the ultra low latency. And if you really want to go to the absolute cutting edge on that side, there's a very very small percentage of the market that is looking at that, right? And that's in
Yeah.
the 1 to 2, 3 nanosecond kind of space.
And who, from your experience, is that sort of high frequency traders, hedge funds, trading shops? Who do you notice operates in that space mostly? What
Uh,
type of profile?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's kind of high frequency traders and the ones who have the capabilities to develop that themselves. In order to get the absolute lowest, you need to customize it completely for your own specific use case and algorithm, right?
Yeah.
And there's value in doing that for the firms that are playing in that space, but there's very little benefit to that for somebody who is at a much higher latency or to the extreme, a click trader, trading market data on your mobile phone, right?
Yeah.
That's you don't need to invest in that same capabilities or space. But saying that, latency has a number of different characteristics, right? And then coming back to your point on how the market is segregated, latency is very beneficial for arbitrage or applications like that where you need the raw latency. But latency has a byproduct, which means if you can do something faster, you can do more things in the same amount of time.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Well, I suppose that's the frequency angle.
well, potentially, but I mean, effectively, when you're thinking about it, if you're at one extreme, and I mentioned mobile phones, if you've got a processor that can perform faster and a more efficient algorithm, you can serve more customers on a single server
Yeah,
than before. So while latency might not be the core function, implementing it in your environment can reduce your digital footprint,
yeah.
can reduce your server rental costs, and understanding that to improve your overall application performance means you can support more end customers on the same hardware and equipment.
And that was sort of segueing in the second point I made about technology. Is it just about speed? And I think what you're saying, it's not just. I mean, speed is one factor, but this quantity, the frequency, quantity, whatever this other dimension, is as important, or is important as well.
Yeah, 100%. And we see this again. I would say this is going back to the trends. Um, 10, 15 years ago, I don't think anybody thought about computing power in the same way. I remember when I was working in the banks, we just said go and buy more servers.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching a point now where that's starting to be pushed back and challenged because the cost of doing so and the space, the data center space, and the power requirements are starting to run out, especially in the world of AI, where power is starting to become a limiting factor
But
in
that
many,
that
many different areas.
I mean, before I met you, the sort of big theme that I'd been talking about for 10, maybe longer, 15, I've lost track of time when I first started, was cloud. I mean, we're all talking about AI now. AI is all we seem to talk about. But well, first of all, there was the low late. I remember low latency was a hot debate at conferences and whatever, panels, discussions, ultra low latency, FPGA, and all that stuff. Then at some point, and I can't remember the exact date, we started talking about cloud. What is cloud? It was in those early days. It was nobody understood what the cloud was, and then over time that's matured, and now we're talking about AI. But have you guys in the world of hardware? I suppose you've been on that journey with us as well. I suppose there was a hardware dimension before your time to that ultra low, because we were talking about FPGA was a hardware acceleration was the phrase,
Mhm.
and then cloud. Your point about servers and space, I mean, cloud is just somebody else's data center. I mean, it's the same model. It's just, your AWS, your Googles, your Microsoft are running the data centers rather than JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley. I'm tying myself in knots here. What we've been on a journey though, haven't we?
We have, and I think the same with everything, right? Not everybody needs an FPGA, and not every use case can be satisfied by the cloud.
Yeah,
What the right approach is to do is to take the best of all options and use them in the right fields and places. Um, so yes, cloud has been very important, and I think what we've also seen though is cloud was heralded as the panacea. Um, Anything that you want, you can just put in the cloud. Don't have to worry about it. It'll all just work.
yeah,
And yes, that can be true. But what we've seen even in the market data space is a number of different partners come up who help optimize your usage within the cloud.
yeah.
Um, and to lower your costs, because if you don't understand what you're using and how you're using it, it's very difficult to maintain that cost advantage if there is one by doing that. I think cloud's great for bursty behavior. It's great for managing variable amounts because you can scale very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but from a latency perspective, it might not be as good as you can optimize with on-premise based solutions. And
Yeah.
if you have a consistent workload, it also can be challenging to compete on costs if you know your workload and it's a constant flow.
I mean,
So
it's horses for courses, isn't it?
brilliant.
And I guess most firms have probably got a hybrid approach. They've got on-prem stuff, processors and what have you, hardware, and then it makes sense to do certain other processes in the cloud. But do you think we've been on this educational journey, and I suspect some mistakes were made where stuff was tried to be put in the cloud and then it didn't really make sense. I think people are learning about the cloud. I mean, egress and ingress is an interesting debate, isn't it? Hey, yeah, put all your data. We'll charge you nothing to put it on here. Oh, you want to take it out? Oh, that we'll send you the invoice for that. I mean, there's been a few little gotchas on the way. I've noticed.
Yeah, they certainly have, and I think not just from that perspective, but also even selecting the instances within the cloud. A lot of people don't even realize that there's often two or three different processors that you can choose from.
Yeah, yeah,
AMD is one of them.
yeah,
Lots of people don't necessarily do the benchmarking when they move to the cloud to see which one is actually more cost efficient based on the running costs. Is it better to go for a cloud instance which is a virtualized and you get a virtual CPU?
yeah.
And are virtual CPUs between CPUs even the same thing? One thing that we notice quite a lot is on some of them, some of the providers, you will find that one vCPU from an Intel is different to one vCPU from an AMD. Because we have things like multi-threading and others. So trying to do a direct comparison just off naming conventions um,
And
actually can affect your overall performance look at how an application's run. So
I mean,
I think it's becoming more and more important to understand what it is, how the infrastructure is built that you're running on in order to get maximum efficiency in terms of cost and best performance as well.
do you think in the early days of the cloud that people just said, "Oh, we're gonna pick between AWS, Google,
Uh,
Microsoft, whatever, Oracle, newer player," and do you think people didn't ask those questions about they picked AWS and put their eggs in that basket, but then didn't ask much more about the basket? Didn't say, "Well, what type of straw is used to make that basket?" I'm mixing the metaphor terribly, but did they just say it's a basket and I don't really care what the basket is made of? Was that the early days?
Yeah, no, I think that was, and you look at, and I think most of the clouds in the very early days only really had one type of instance. But I
Yeah,
think what's evolved is that the clouds have gotten smarter. The clouds want to be agnostic in one
yeah,
sense because they want to give all of the different providers an opportunity, but they
yeah.
also have their own custom designs now as well to attract specific customers in for specific use cases. And
Well,
you see this with people developing their own ARM
well, that was
processors
yeah, because
in.
I've read about that. So Google have got their own chips. Because I think, again, we're going off in a bit of a tangent, but I think it's an interesting one. Again, one of you guys, but you won't mind me mentioning Nvidia because Nvidia's got a lot of profile, not least because of its
Oh,
share price. Although your share price, yeah, I think lunch
I
is
know
on
them
you
fairly well.
next time we see each other because I think the AMD share price has done rather rather nicely. But were some of the cloud providers feeling uncomfortable that they were almost too dependent on the chip providers, and then they got in on the game? They said, "Well, if we can make our own chips." I mean, describe that story. I mean, what's gone on there? What are Obviously, you've got an AMD perspective, so you're going to give it your spin. But I mean, generally,
Yeah, I
educate
mean,
me.
obviously I can't speak directly on behalf of any of the providers or why they made the decisions, but what we can certainly see is there's within the semiconductor industry there's a lot of competition to innovate and differentiate, right? And it's
Yeah,
the same as being in the market data space. People are looking for ways to create new advantages with their products. Um, and but there are some limitations, right? By going for a single vendor's dedicated piece of silicon, if that's not widely available both on-prem and in the cloud or multi-cloud, then
yeah.
it raises the question whether or not you need to maintain two or three different code bases to be able to run your software across multiple different platforms. So there are challenges by doing that, and you might be able to gain an advantage on a specific use case. But the trade-off is going to be maintenance and longevity of that product, and also being able to move between the different cloud providers. And I think that's
Sure.
where the x86 technology that both Intel and AMD use, which underpins our technology, is widely available on-prem, in the cloud, and across multi-clouds. Um, and it doesn't require any code change to move between any of those different options. So it really gives you that full flexibility to pick up your application and just move it. Obviously, each of those architectures can be slightly different. So if you want to get the best out of it, you're going to need to make some small minor modifications. But in general, the technology, the basic instruction set is the same, and so you can run your applications without changing the code, which
And
is
uh,
significant.
and that I've seen that happen a lot. You know, you can get the absolute best in a sort of customized way, and that can seem like, you know, for the precise thing you want to do, that particular solution is the best. But then it's sort of you're stuck with that provider, that particular setup, and you've got no flexibility to change, and the supportability, you're very dependent on that provider and what have you. So yeah, I've seen that happen in my long career, that
And I
sometimes a
think,
slightly more, you know,
yeah,
standardized approach can be more safer.
yes, and I think especially now, it's interesting to see the approach that, for example, now in Europe, the European market is taking, where they have active programs now to have a technology independence, and come away and use their own European homegrown technology as well, and including clouds for data sovereignty and other use cases. I think the EU announced that only in the last week or so. And for example, even the French government is now moving entirely to a French-owned and made video conferencing software for the local government.
I mean,
I think those kind of things are interesting because, and again, relate to this freedom of the underlying architecture being standardized. Because, if there are new regulations that are proposed in the future by Europe or another location, which requires people to hold their data in a European sovereign cloud, that could be a major change.
I mean,
I don't think we're there yet. I can't predict what the European regulators are going to do, but I
but
think we
we
all know that things
I,
can change fairly rapidly.
I'm going to risk something here because I'm going to stray in a little bit of political area. Not asking us to take sides or anything, but just observing the political machinations that are out there. So you can ignore or duck these questions if you don't like them, but I'll throw them around a bit anyway. Because again, to that last point, there's this sort of EU. I mean, it is because of some of the politics that has gone on more recently. Am I right? Is AMD? Apologies for not knowing this. Is that an American? I'm
It is,
trying.
yeah, yeah.
It's
We're based out of Santa Clara,
yeah,
California.
and again, I think this is one of the observations that, you know, the vast majority of these big tech companies are sort of US based. But again, help me out here. A couple of other issues. Isn't Taiwan the sort of this massive manufacturer of silicon? And then you've got the sort of China discussions of what China is doing. And then I'm digging even deeper, the rare earth metals that are needed to build all these chips. I mean, there's a sort of layers of politics here. Again, bit of an unfair thing to throw at you, but at a very generic level, how does that all play out?
If I had a magic bowl, David, then I would love to use it and go to the right place. But no, Taiwan is been a great partner for us. TMSC, which is the
And
faction
why is
manufacturers out.
Taiwan this big important center? I haven't fully understood that.
So there's a company called TMSC who manufacture chips,
Right.
um, and they have done exceptionally well at manufacturing on the lowest nodes. So basically, very very small transistors, which are used to make any silicon that you can think of. Now, not every application needs the latest node and the smallest chips. As you get smaller, it's better power efficiency, better performance, um, and you can do more in the same amount of space or physical space because it's smaller. And Taiwan, TMSC happened to be leading the way with the most advanced nodes,
And they make
and
some of your chips.
ahead at the moment.
They make
They make a lot of our chips, and they make a lot of our people like NVIDIA and others also use that factory, and it's one of the key differentiators. There's a lot of different foundries around the world specializing in different sizes, and people are also catching up in various different markets as well. So, but right now TMSC is the leader
so
in that space.
so AMD, Intel, Nvidia. Your skill is designing the chip. Is that your role rather than being a manufacturer, or do you also have your own manufacturing plants?
No, so we you're right. We're what's called a fabless company at AMD. So we don't manufacture in our fab.
Yeah,
Intel, on the other hand, does have its own manufacturing
right,
capabilities, um, and they can design and manufacture their own silicons.
right.
Whereas we and NVIDIA primarily use TMSC.
Got it. Okay. So that's the sort of the layer. And again, I threw in that rare earth. I mean, does the rare earth stuff, is it lithium and thing? I mean, what is there a problem there brewing, or is that, the shortage of those rare earth, does that matter in the grand scheme of things?
I mean, look, there's always new technologies, and people will always find new ways around problems. Um, there's lots of demand for a lot of these rare earths. You can see that with the commodity prices recently, but I don't think it's going to affect the market data industry too
No,
much.
I'm just whimsically, I'm just curious about some of these things, but I digressed a bit there. So back to the market data industry. So we're in the market data industry. We followed that low latency debate. Then we went into the cloud debate. We're in the AI debate. There's a sequence, and then in parallel to all this, you came along, and started talking to us, and it was fascinating to sort of throw in the hardware dimension. I mean, is it unfair to ask you to give us an idiot's guide to the sort of the hardware? I mean, what are the sort of elements that somebody looking at different hardware? I mean, frankly, I've done. I've got my laptop. It's an AMD laptop rather than an Intel laptop because that's the CPU. But
Mhm.
then there was the graphic cards where Nvidia and you were. But I don't think Intel does GPUs, do they? I mean,
Uh,
it's
they,
mainly
they,
you.
they've started to do a few things, and they've had various realms into it, but mainly on the consumer side. But yes, I mean AMD is definitely the number two behind NVIDIA, and we're catching up pretty quickly on the GPU space.
And I mean, I remember because in my youth, I used to play games. I mean, graphic processing units were more about games 20 years ago. When did the capital markets wake up to GPUs? It was like FPGAs were earlier, and then GPUs started to be appreciated as a way of hardware acceleration. Have I said that in the right way?
I think what you'll actually find is that GPUs have been used for quite some time in the industry.
Okay,
Um, as far back, I think, as early 2010s, GPUs have been used in the finance space. But GPUs and FPGAs solve completely different problems, and same with CPUs. So, I think where people so a CPU is a general purpose piece of silicon, right? It's the
right.
easiest to program. You don't need to have any custom languages, and you can run all of your different applications on it. So CPUs are great for general purpose use cases. Um, and if you want to take advantage of some of the specific microcode, you can get even better accelerations with CPUs. So
Right.
we've seen a significant increase in adoption even of AMD CPUs in this space because for low power benefits and performance
And that
per watt
power, the
has
cost of
made it
electricity
crazy.
is, yeah, yeah.
Yes. It's become more and more significant. So we've seen
Yeah.
customers deploy AMD architectures and replace their entire like grid infrastructures, as an example, um, and save on up to a third a year on their annual electricity costs with increased performance over what they had before. So that's a significant saving and something that COOs and others are very interested in, right? How
Right.
technology can play a role in improving your ESG scores, lowering your impact, but also saving you bottom dollars. So you can go and actually start investing that elsewhere. Now, an FPGA is which AMD also makes
All right.
after our acquisition of Xilinx. That's really designed for low latency customizable programming.
Yeah.
It was actually designed for prototyping chips and other things in the past and being reprogrammable hardware.
Yeah.
But the finance industry has used this for trading applications. Now,
And you have to
um,
program it with a very specific type of language. I can't remember the
correct.
name of it.
Yeah, Verilog or VHDL
Yeah.
is one of the ways. So you need a specialist engineers to do this, and it can be very complicated.
Right.
And there are industry partners, some of which I mentioned earlier, who leverage this and can sell you full baked solutions.
It was the Exergy
Interesting.
world and the old Active
Correct.
Financial. Now Active Financial is now is it part of options? I've lost track of who's bought who.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So there's been a number of third parties who've used this technology and are offering it to customers or building it in house. But it is very specialized, um, and it can be quite costly to
Yeah.
maintain. Now GPUs are actually very highly programmable devices as well, but they are really not low latency devices. So the what they can do is do a lot of processing simultaneously and in parallel, much more than a CPU can, but also at a much higher power draw
Oh,
um,
right. Right.
and a higher latency.
Got it.
Um, but if you've got a big enough set of data, your overall time of job completion is going to come down, which is where GPUs have really made a big inroad and a big difference. So it's not about latency of a single transaction there. It's about the latency of your entire model that you're running on the GPU. And this is where AI has come in as well. There's some pretty large models which are reliant on highly parallel programming, which is where GPUs are really useful to do that. But inferencing is still often done on either an FPGA if it's an extremely small model, um, or on a CPU. So not all inferencing is necessarily done on a GPU today, even in the AI space.
So let's segment our audience, the people who are probably watching and listening now. I hope we're going to have some quite technical people listening, and I might ask you to dig into a bit of your inner geek on that. But again, there's probably a lot of people, and I include myself, who've don't have a deep technical background. So what are the sort of discussions and question when you're going talking to well, I suppose you've got different audiences. You are selling to big bulge bracket banks and high frequency trade. In other words, the actual financial institutions that are doing the trading. So they're one audience. But then, are you also talking to and selling to the sort of the old Refinitives, now LSEG and Bloomberg and S&P and FactSet? Are you selling to the exchanges, the people who are providing this data? I mean, what's your audience? What's your marketplace out there? And what sort of things are they thinking about and asking you about?
So, I mean, I think everybody needs technology in this space, and AMD is one of the, I think, or if not the only firm, silicon firm in the world, which produces FPGAs, CPUs, networking cards like AMD Solarflare,
Yeah.
and GPUs all under one roof. Um, so really, we have quite a wide variety of different topics to go and speak to people. So if you look at the most basic or fundamental improvement to performance that people could make, exchanges and others, um, is just dropping in something simple like a Solarflare networking card. And that is why 9 out of the 10 top exchanges in the world run on Solarflare. Um, so you can take your application, put in a Solarflare card, use our onload, and immediately get significant performance improvements in terms of messages per second and latency to help your software application get a leg up and be more competitive without making a
Right.
single line of code change, which is pretty significant. And that's one of the
Because
reasons
and that's interesting. The
we
whole
started.
latency discussion is a sequence of different things,
Correct.
and you've got to look at your latency from start to finish, and there might be 10 different steps.
That's right. And it depends which one you want to do. And that's why I sort of said that what we found was that starting with the Solarflare networking card was the biggest individual uplift with the shortest amount of involvement necessarily from the software development,
Yeah.
reprogramming, and so on. And we've got a great team in Cambridge who support customers in this space and are very knowledgeable about how to help accelerate your
I need to have
data
an affiliate
platform.
link, don't I? I need to have an affiliate link.
Yeah.
Another day.
And then, what we see from there is people look at the CPU as the next step, right?
Okay.
And because if you're running a software-based application, the first thing is get some free boost, which is your networking card.
Yeah.
Second thing is how do I then get the best out of my existing software? And that might be to consolidate your data center, reduce the number of servers, do more with less power in the same footprint, which is really important, especially if you've got sort of co-location or other use cases. But also, as we've seen market data volumes grow pretty substantially, every year we're setting new records in terms of total flow.
Yeah.
You just have to look at Opera or any of the feeds. It's just getting larger. It's not getting smaller,
Yeah.
right? And especially as these exchanges are upgrading their technologies, um, that in turn means that people can now put in more messages and the volumes continue to grow as well. So having the capabilities to process that in the same footprint um, is really important for customers and being able to analyze that market data and make use of that market data,
Is
capture
it?
it, do the time stamping. All the rest requires good hardware. You can do time
And
stamping on the Stellar You can focus on your CPUs to AMD CPUs are giving a massive leg up, allowing you to do more in that same power profile
is
as well.
by far the most focus on server-based CPUs. I mean, does the desktop feature much? Do people care? Is it servers where their game is really?
It's both, right? Data center is definitely where the larger volumes necessarily are coming from these days, and in terms of the higher end, and most market data platforms are doing that. But AMD also provide a large range of desktops. So with our Ryzen, which is in our laptops, in our gaming servers, they are really leading the way in terms of performance and
But in
value
terms of
and volume.
the
But now you can
conversation,
actually
yeah,
see we've got another product called Threadripper, which really sits in a class of its own. But that is for trader workstations and
got
others
it.
to be able to process all of your market data locally with incredible speed. And that's really the fastest options available.
So it's a sort of think about FPGA, and that's probably only a very small portion of the industry. Then most people were going to be very focused on the CPU, and then it's the GPU. So there's a sort of and the network card, which
Yeah.
yeah. So those are all. I mean, just going back to one point, and I don't know. I've got to be careful about using my words here. Power has two connotations. There's the power of the how powerful the processor is one definition of power, but
Mhm.
then the consumption of power, the consumption of electricity, really.
Yes.
I mean, if you go along and you're talking to a customer and you say I can give you 5% more computing power, um, and somebody else comes along and can offer 10% more computing power, but then you've reduced the electricity consumption by 20% versus their 10% or something. In other words, which is more important? How are you finding out there? How do people trade those two things off? Will people give up a little bit of compute power to save on electricity costs? Or obviously they want both, really.
Yeah, and I think that's really it's a good point. And you know we have at AMD a large number of SKUs. So we've got some high frequency components which are a little bit more power hungry, but give you that extra clock speed and that extra
Sorry,
um,
a skew. What's a
throughput.
skew? Use the word
A
skew.
SKU, it's a version of our CPUs. Not every CPU is the same. Some have more cores, some have less cores, and they're all made with conscious design choices. Just to your point there, we go up to, for example, 192 cores on one processor, um, which
And so what? I mean, what is that? Is that more powerful, more computing power? I mean, what does that in?
that's more cores in a smaller footprint. So what it means is, with inside the same rack size or server footprint, you can get more cores to do your application, and that's really good for things like Monte Carlo simulations or
Yeah,
any large scale data because you want the large number of cores. But those
right.
cores aren't going to run as fast as a lower core count CPU. For example, our 64 core CPU is a high frequency part. Which is very popular in trading applications because you get much higher clock speed in order to run your trading algorithms when you need to respond to market events. But not everything needs to respond to a market event in that same. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier. It's if you understand the hardware, you can make the right technology choice, and this is where people like myself from AMD and our team around the world are helping customers make the right choice. Because just testing one of these devices might not be the right device for your specific use case. So having that bridge between hardware and software and application users is going to be really important to get the best choice for your application.
I mean, how sophisticated is the customer base out there, or does it vary massively? That some are asking very intelligent, very perceptive questions, and others a lot. I mean, how much education do you have to do out there, or are you?
It varies widely, David. You know, there are some people who technology decisions is their bread and butter, and that's what
Yeah,
makes the money. And they're very in tune. They understand a lot, and they can customize a lot for our applications. But there are other customers out there who really need a bit more education from that perspective. But I think this is not a new problem, David. You know, we've always had these partners. I spoke about the FPGAs. Not everybody needs to write an FPGA because you can go
yeah.
and buy a solution from our market participants. And this is what I said earlier. I think what we've seen now is in the market data space, a lot of new market entrants who are starting to um, do that optimization,
Well, yeah. Who?
get that benefit, and be able to showcase this to the industry so the industry can just leverage some more expertise from this industry.
Throw some examples out. I mean, who are these new upstarts? These new. I'm curious, just for my education.
No, no, I mean, but you know, I mean, when I say upstart, some of them can be very new, and some of them can be a little bit longer. But people like Cairo is brand new.
Okay.
Um, who is you know they've got some really interesting technology and launched last year. Markets.io,
Oh yeah, Terry
relatively
and
new
Bryant.
as
Yeah,
well in the grand scheme of things, and are also leveraging new technologies to help bridge that difference for customers. So. And there are others that are coming up, and people are innovating in that space. So I think it's really interesting, and a lot of these guys are doing it on commoditized hardware, and this is for 90% of the market, right? Rather than the
yeah,
cutting edge. Um, as I said, you know, you've seen some consolidation in the industry with some of the FPGA providers and the ultra low latency space. Um, but you know, our industry goes through these events all the time, David. You know,
yeah.
there's
No, it's
consolidation and then new technology startups
hello.
are coming. So it's
Uh,
just nice to see that we're not at the end. We're just at the beginning, and
well,
we always are.
actually, that prompts a question that I've talked about in a lot of my podcast episodes. when I started in the industry in the 80s and maybe even in the early 90s, I mean, banks and stuff were throwing money at different solutions, all trying to beat each other. It was the Wild West in a good sort of way, an exciting way. Sort of money was no object, just throw money at it and we'll see what happens. But then various crashes happened, various things went on. And for the last good 20 years, really, we've been in this world of cost cutting, of being so conservative with a small c, so careful. I mean, how cost conscious is the market? I mean, how, in terms of what was it? Somebody said to me, this I've told this story many times on podcasts. It's like I've gone out, I'm trying to sell this new product called a £20 note, and I'm selling them for £10. And the customer said, I've just got no budget. My procurement process won't, it's like you've got this slam dunk solution, but people are just so cautious and cost conscious. I mean, what do you see out there? What is the nature of the market at the moment in terms of its willingness to spend money?
So, I mean, from my perspective, David, certainly what I see is that, it comes back to the customer that you're looking for and understanding how they're going to make benefit. If you can show a material business benefit by investing in something, I think the money is always there. I
Right.
think, but there's also a driver to reduce costs, which is a constant feature of any industry, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think with a lot of these new providers as well, if they're able to show, well, we can do um, the same or give you a performance improvement, but only using half the hardware, then that's a material cost saving
Yeah.
as you're upgrading. So it makes sense to go and do those, even from a cost perspective. If you can also show that you're going to increase your performance while reducing costs, it's a win-win for everybody. And so it's a meaningful process to go down. And I think, there are customers who are willing to invest. At AMD, we've got some specifically designed FPGAs, which are at the very, very high end, and people are willing to pay for that latest technology at a significantly higher rate than a standard commoditized piece of hardware. So it really depends where you're investing your money. And I think what we see now with AI is budgets are going into AI and people are spending a lot of money. I think the estimated value of the market in a couple of years will be nearly $1 trillion a year. So it's fairly significant investment, and I think people are investing. They're just looking at where to invest their dollars and how they're going to get their best bang for the buck.
I mean, we're in the final 10 minutes. AI. I mean, where do you start? I mean, there's all this talk about a stock market bubble, but which we won't go into. But I mean, in terms of actually where we're going with AI, what are you seeing out there? Where is AI being used most? I mean, are you seeing an increased demand for your products directly because of projects that are running in some sort of AI context? I mean, there's lots of different flavors of AI. Again, set the scene. Where are we going with AI in 26, but also for the next 2 or 3 years? Are you just seeing a sort of an exponential growth, a linear growth? I mean, what are you seeing out there? What are you hearing?
I mean, there are plenty of reports about the industry and the growth of AI, and most of them look towards more sort of exponential growth in terms of volume and trade there. I think we're still in a relatively early stage of AI. And if you look even at the announcement that our CEO made just under a month ago now at CES, if you look at our MI 325 and some of the older GPUs, and when I say older, I mean like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all relative, isn't
uh,
it? Yeah.
the GPUs in 2 years' time will be 1,000 times more powerful. Um, so the growth in processing capabilities is immense.
As
Um,
Moore's law gone out the window? Is
it's a
is
completely different law
Yeah.
because Moore's law really related to, I guess, compute power and CPUs really at the time, and GPUs have just
on a different level. Yeah.
On a different level. But saying that, GPUs can't do everything, right? And this is where it's important. You still need your different technologies for different use cases. But yes, I think one thing that we're going to see is a lot more competition in the GPU space. More movement towards open standards. You're already seeing this with technologies like UA Link and UEC, which are all competitive to proprietary products from the market leader today. Because I think people, again, don't want a vendor lock-in. They want that open source. They want that open standards to be
But
able to use that.
whoever's got the lead quite likes a lock-in. I mean,
Of course.
I mean, wouldn't you? If you,
Look, I mean, well, AMD is always been open source
yeah.
and pushing open standards, right? That's our bread and butter from an organization standpoint, and something we strongly believe in. We want to win because we've got the best technology, not because we force people
To be stuck
um,
with you. Yeah.
be stuck, and we believe that we've got the best technology and the great roadmap across all our product lines to enable people to um, choose AMD and make the choice that's right for them. So I think we'll certainly see that further adoption. We've got some really exciting AI clusters coming out now. I think to your point earlier, um, you know, the data center versus the desktop and the workstations. We AMD historically was gaming in the
Yeah.
desktops, and we're starting to make a lot more inroads into those workstation use cases with our ROCm software, which is giving you the ability, even on your laptops, to run these AI models and transfer them directly into large-scale cloud deployments. And Helios is coming out later this year, which is our rack level AI clusters. It's done in a very different way. Again, AMD is not selling the rack itself. We have created a reference design working with our partners in the industry, all of the OEMs, to build these scales and provide that service and really building that community ecosystem.
So we're fast approaching the end. You I think you were skeptical whether we get through an hour at the beginning, but I knew we would. I mean, I always, and I warned you about this, or I advised you, not warned you, this chance. What haven't we talked about? What couple of messages, what couple of educational points would you put out there, apart from buy AMD, which I think you've eloquently said quite, but I mean, couple of parting thoughts.
I think even more than buy AMD, and I think back to my point is that hardware has made significant changes over the last 5 to 10 years in general. More significant, and it's changing at a much faster rate than it has in the decade before. And I think that's being driven by AI. It's being driven by a number of different changes in the industry, which require higher data rates, higher lower power usage and other use cases. So what I think is important for the industry and why it's relevant to market data is to understand the platforms you're running on, take a look at what's out there, and see how you can lower your cost and increase your performance um, by making smarter and better choices and understanding how to use the commoditized hardware that's available for you today. And I think that's the real key is that there's a lot of choice out there. Go and look at it, evaluate it, and make your own decisions on what makes sense and how you can bring new value back into the organizations as well to showcase a cost saving and a performance improvement.
But it requires a bit of self-education, but to understand this, because people haven't been as engaged with hardware as you're saying they should be now. So it requires that audience to up its game a bit, its skill set and whatever. And look, I applaud you. I mean, I've met you because you've engaged with the FISD. Well, this is David Anderson. This is not me as an FISD person, but obviously I know you primarily through my FISD conversations. And I think it's really refreshing that you come out to talk to us and to engage with the overall community. Intriguingly, certain other providers are sort of way back in the back. They haven't chosen to quite come forward as much as you have. So I think that's exciting and that's positive. So thank you for
No,
doing
and
that.
thank you very much for the invite, David. It's
Well,
always a pleasure to talk to you and speak to the market data community at large.
and hopefully we will see more of each other. Although as I am pulling a little bit away from the FISD world, you might see me a little bit less in the FISD world, but I'm still here. So, anyway, look, thank you so much. And I'm going to stop the recording. Don't go away, but cheerio.
Thanks very much, everyone.